Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, and today's podcast host. Today we're going to be talking about permitting in Michigan, why it matters, where the system works and where it doesn't, and how the regulatory process that we can make can be efficient, transparent, predictable, so we can have job creation here in Michigan. Joining me today to have this discussion, State Representative Bill Schuette. He's the chair of the House Rules Committee and the Red Tape Reduction Initiative. Mike Patwell, a member and senior director at the Clark Hill Law Firm, and the Michigan Chamber's very own Mike Alaimo. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Appreciate the conversation today. Permitting certainly impacts people in a lot of ways. I think many people don't understand how much it impacts them. But I'd like to start with a little bit of level setting. Mike Alaimo, if you can start with, what is permitting? Like, what do we think about when you talk to our members in the business community?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think maybe your common average citizen might not be clear on what permitting is, but actually, you know, I think in today's day when we're talking about, you know, politics and so many aspects of our life, for the average business owner, that is probably where they interface with state and federal government the most, is getting your license or permit to operate or build, and so it's really the regulatory structure that allows for business investment in the state. I mean, if you are making investments in a development, upgrading a facility, doing the things that we all want you to do to create jobs and growth, you probably need a permit or a license to do it. And so that's why it matters. I mean, it's really where the rubber hits the road for businesses in the state.
Yeah, Mike Patwell, how's it come into play for an attorney? Like, what are you looking at when you're representing clients? What are they coming you asking for?
Yeah, so first, I think it's understanding the hierarchy of laws and what governs permitting. So at a basic level, and for state permitting, we have state statutes, and those are administered by regulatory agencies, usually within the executive branch of government. And those agencies are promulgating regulations, which are governed by the Administrative Procedures Act, and then they have employees who are out in the field, trying to actually implement the legislative directive, and all that is subject to case law and constitutional protections for private property rights.
So it's pretty much a framework, government framework for how citizens interact in certain areas, whether they're developing or building or their business operations or...
Sure. So you have all these different laws that have different relations with each other, so it can get kind of complicated. And then you have human beings who work for the government who are out interfacing with specific fact patterns for various projects. So it creates a lot of opportunity for a lawyer to get involved when things don't necessarily go smoothly, or where there are ambiguities. And so it's a very interesting area of law to practice in, and you can get a wide variety of different types of legal issues that arise within that. And as Mike mentioned, every year we get more and more laws, which lead to more and more regulations, and that push, definitely creeps into private property rights. And that's where we get a lot of legal questions.
Yeah, well, certainly a big impact, and the words that everyone likes to hear, when lawyers get involved. And I say that as an attorney, not always everyone's favorite thought. Representative Schuette, so it's impacting businesses, impacting individuals, probably most importantly from your perspective, it impacts constituents. It's how people in your district can operate. Just wondering, how did you get in to the permitting space? Is it something you chose to focus on, or were you kind of drafted into it?
Yeah, well, so first elected to the State House in our 2022 election, and from the first doors that I knocked on in my first State House campaign, I was hearing about issues with state government permitting, licensing, and, Dow, one of the Michigan Chamber's largest members, is in my district, but I was hearing about permitting from the hundreds of different small businesses that make up mid-Michigan and make up a great fabric across our state. And it's because it takes you 3 times as long to get a permit in the state of Michigan as it does in Indiana or Ohio. Or you're a small business, you want to grow and expand and bring on more employees, government's getting in your way. So it was something that was very clearly from the outset of my first campaign identified as a major issue. And then, when in Governor Whitmer's 7th State of the State, the third one that I had listened to in the chambers, she mentioned cutting red tape. I viewed that as an opportunity, right? We have split, divided government in Lansing right now, and I said, well, gee, maybe there is an opportunity for us to work on this. And Speaker Hall had designated me as chairman of the Rules Committee, and was a great opportunity to work on an initiative that I've been partnering with the chamber and other advocacy groups across our state to ways to make it easier to start a business and start a family.
Yeah, are you seeing opportunities being taken advantage, like people on both sides of the aisle? Are they finding this doesn't have to be a partisan issue? This should be something about making Michigan stronger, enabling people to proceed with their life and their businesses. Certainly, it's one of the issues I hear a lot from our members at the Michigan Chamber of Commerce is permitting is a huge cost to business and trying to make sure it's efficient.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a Republican or a Democrat issue, and so much of our politics, we think is what we see on, Fox or MSNBC, whatever is your flavor. But there's a lot that we can do at the state government level to deliver for Michiganders. And, we have a Democrat governor, I'm a Republican, and a lot of the initiatives that we've been working on have had broad bipartisan support. And, the governor's own licensing and regulatory affairs department put out a list of recommendations that they thought, what are some ways where we can cut red tape, and went through that with my team, and I said, hey, I get on board with about 70% of this, which is in politics you agree about 70% of the time. That's pretty good.
That's a great average.
That's pretty good, right? So and we've been able to make some progress on that, and we've had an initial tranche of bills that we've been working on, and we're working on more because there's unfortunately a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, Jim, if I could just piggyback off of what Representative said, I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover, as you point out. I mean, the chamber actually joined up with the Grand Rapids Chamber and the home builders to do a survey going back a couple years now, just surveying our membership, asking them, how is government working for you? Where are the pain points? How are you feeling about the state of things? By a broad majority, we heard environmental permitting and licensing, biggest issues that businesses are facing. It's a huge obstacle for them to invest and succeed in the state. And as Representative Schuette pointed out, it's a nonpartisan issue, right? It's Democrat or Republicans alike. You should want businesses to feel like they have agency to go out and invest in the state and do so without encumbrance. And so it's a clear problem that we're here to solve. Mr. Patwell here does a lot of the other side of the coin that the chamber often engages in as well, where you're running up against an agency that is making decisions, legal determinations that our membership feels are outside of their purview or a reinterpretation of statute, and then we wind up in the courts. And so that's an important piece of it as well. So I just love the format here where we have Representative Schuette really trying to help reform and modify the laws to make it easier for business. And we have, one of the leading minds in, the legal world working to kind of figure this out in the courts.
So he's a helpful attorney. We're hearing that a couple times. It seems to be a theme here.
Yeah.
Are there areas, I'm interested, that work well in permitting? If we could talk a little bit for the audience, is this something that gets dealt with issue by issue, statute by statute, or is there a bigger just structural situation? We say fix a structure and then it doesn't matter the issue, they'll all kind of come together and work well. Mike Patwell, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. No. There's a lot there. First of all, maybe I have a biased viewpoint, right? So I'm a litigator, and for the last decade or so, most of my litigation has been adverse to administrative agencies. Before that time, I actually served as legal counsel to what was then the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality and what is now EGLE. So I have that perspective during a different administration. My general takeaway first is where we see lawyers get involved. I kind of broke it down in my mind to three sort of problems. One, we have a lack of clarity. And again, back to the hierarchy of laws. Is there a lack of clarity in the statute, in the regulation, in the guidance? And then the second issue that occurs that lawyers end up getting involved in would be consistency. So you have different agency personnel applying a law differently or applying it incorrectly, and perhaps from time to time overreaching beyond what the legislative directive was. And then the third that the good representative, I'm sure, hears about this the most is timeframes, right? Timeframes are really important, and we've seen a wide variety over the last 2 decades in the practice of law of how long it takes for an approval to be granted. And timeframe, if you're on the finance side, can be so important to some of these bigger projects. So those are the 3 sort of touch points, I think, that lead to lawyers getting involved in permitting type disputes.
Representative Schuette, kind of a 2-part question for you. One kind of an overview. Is there a specific philosophy or pillars that you follow when you're delving into this? And is it possible to put in statute a timeline that says you have to do a permit within X amount of days or months or years?
Yeah, and again, we all want our state to be a state that's safe to do business. We want our environment to be clean, and I strongly believe that there are ways you can do that and have consistency, predictability, and reliability in the timelines in which we're issuing permits. And I mean, again, you only need to look to our neighbors to the south that are eating our lunch when it comes to business growth and development because of, in a large part, their regulatory and permitting standpoints are a lot better than ours. And I think there's a couple of ways where we can start on this. You can reduce timelines, one, on businesses, and you can reduce and you can improve predictability and reliability on just simplifying the process to begin with. Right now, you're a child care provider in the state of Michigan. You need to go to 6 or 8 different different agencies to get your permits, to get your regulatory approvals, and that's just at the state level. That's not talking about the townships or the municipal zonings you have to do. It's the same thing with housing. You have 4 or 5 different agencies you have to go and report to, and you go across from Marquette down to Monroe. Everybody wants to reduce the cost of childcare and housing.
Yep.
And
exactly.
So you think about things of, okay, what can we do to allow there to be a one-stop shop? I know I need to go to this one agency, this one place to get the whole suite of permits completed. That would do a lot to reduce that. But then also, you can have one administration. We had the Snyder administration that was doing a lot of regulatory streamlining, making things more efficient. And then you have a different administration that has a different philosophy. What can we put into statute? What can the legislature put into law? So it doesn't matter if it's waxing or waning of the administrations. You have predictability and reliability there.
Just for Mike, go ahead. Did you have a thought on that?
Well, yes, I did. And I think the one thing is that's all substantive. And kind of what I think you may have been alluding to earlier, Jim, was the process. And in Michigan, we have a statute, the Administrative Procedures Act. And this is the act that sets the process by which administrative agencies administer the legislative directives in the broad brushstrokes, and it also serves as the primary law that protects private property owners and private regulated businesses from administrative overreach and perhaps other activities that wouldn't be in accord with due process. So I think you have to look at it both from a substantive standpoint and what can the legislature reasonably do to be more precise when giving directives to administrative agencies. But we also, I think, as a state, need to revisit the APA and look at, especially what Representative Schuette mentioned, our neighbors to the south. Not only do they have good football teams, but they have an Administrative Procedures Act that provide a little bit more protection and security for your average person. It's great to do what I do and help people get projects completed. It is sad sometimes, though, when you do get clients that perhaps can't afford legal counsel to navigate these issues, and I can get into it in more detail. I don't want to be a know-it-all or talk too much. The lawyer in me, I guess. But yeah, there's some things we can do there on the process side as well.
Yeah, Mike Alaimo, and your work for the chamber and for the businesses across the state, how much of this breaks down into a partisanship problem? Because obviously we have administrations that vacillate back and forth, Republican or Democrat. But listening to Mike Patwell talk, some of this could be helped in the legislative process and put more specificity. But I'm interested from your perspective in the business community, and then Representative Schuette's, how much of this is a partisan problem where you almost you can only get vague statutes across the finish line, and when you get specific, that's what kind of throws up some of the problems.
Yeah, Mike Patwell alluded to this, as did Representative Schuette. That rule promulgation area is where oftentimes you run into, some really tricky situations where, through the sausage-making process, the legislature is working to get a bill across the finish line. That means concessions that inevitably take place. It's part of the discussion. Oftentimes, when you're boiling a legislative package or product down to its nuts and bolts, you do run into that rule promulgation piece being a sticking point for whatever side of the aisle or whatever lawmaker getting involved in the process. And oftentimes you do see the compromise being struck of just saying, okay, well, we're just going to give them kind of this, we're going to put some guardrails in place, but generally speaking, some broad, authority to make rules on this one topic or on this one piece of the legislation. And then years down the road, right, you run into an issue of saying, well, maybe we're on our second, third, or fourth round of rule promulgation on this one statutory authority, and this is now getting further and further away from the true intent of the bill as passed, right? So you absolutely run into that, and I think we've seen that both at the state and the federal level. I do want to mention, we have federal legislation also moving called the SPEED Act. It moved through the House in late last year, where it's in front of the Senate right now. We feel like, in talking to our congressional delegation, that there is support for this. We're hopeful that we can get this through the Senate. Of course, we're now advocating in front of Senator Slotkin and Peters to take action on this and understand how important this is. So we're hopeful for expedited action there. But yeah, you run into that, and so state and federal level, there are there's a inner working between them that businesses have to navigate through. I also want to point out, as what was mentioned earlier, then you have the local process, right? You have the municipal zoning or decision-making process. We're not actually really talking about that, right? I mean, I think we hear a lot about how important it is that locals have a voice in operations and developments popping up in their backyard. We have our own approach. Chamber has our own voice in that space, but this is really about saying, yeah, we should get to that part of the conversation sooner, right? We should be able to in fairly quick action move through the federal and or state processes, regulatory processes, to get in front of the locals to then have those conversations about moving forward.
Representative Schuette, is the process in place where you could, thinking about the specificity that maybe needs to get into a statute, or, as I recall from my legislative staffing days, I think there's a phrase we put it at the end of a lot of bills, and agencies empowered to promulgate any and all.
ABCD.
And I think that was one of the reasons that Speaker Hall decided to create the Rules Committee, was to look at that's a loophole you can drive a semi-truck through, right? Of the bandwidth it gives the departments to promulgate rules, and that's the legislature. It's easier to do it because it's probably politically less complicated to go in and delineate exactly what it means. But it's us abdicating a lot of our responsibility and our duty to our districts and to our constituents. And so that's specifically what we've been doing a lot in the Rules Committee, is when we have legislation that may have that paragraph, we say, well, they'll promulgate rules that say X, Y, and Z. So that way it is in statute. And I'll say that was probably the area where we had some disagreement with the administration on the report, is they said, hey, there's a couple of things that are in statute that we think you should move to rulemaking. And we said, no, these are things we need to keep in statute to make sure that it's interpreted the way that
It seems like that's much better for transparency and predictability as well for the general public, that, put as much in statute as you can, so, there's not as much ability for a department just to kind of blow with the wind and do what they want to do at that point.
Yeah, so from a legal perspective, the constitutional doctrine that really governs this discussion is the non-delegation doctrine, and it's a constitutional concept that legislating should be done by legislators. And
Right.
well, it's important because especially the representatives in the House are the closest we have to the people, and they're accountable to the people. So the doctrine, however, in practice hasn't been upheld all that much by the courts. There's one recent example, but all it really requires is reasonably guided principles from the people through the legislature to administrative agencies. And what I've seen in my 20 years practicing administrative law is the agencies have a huge advantage. They're not elected, so they don't have to deal with constituents. Yep. They have all three powers. They have the powers of all three branches. They have the power to make policy, like legislators do through the rule promulgation process. They have the power to implement through the executive and to enforce. And then they have adjudicatory powers. And then on the backside, there's another constitutional doctrine that a lot of people have heard about, which is deference. And, whether or not a court will overrule an administrative agency. And there's two types of deference. The first is the legal deference, which in Michigan we're fortunate. We've got great case law from our Michigan Supreme Court that the courts will give respectful consideration to an agency's view of what the law says, what their command is from the legislature. But then we have a strong level of deference given to fact determinations that are made by agencies. And I know the representative gets this, and we especially get this trying to explain to our clients who are going through the project why they may have experts who have 40, 50 years of experience doing that particular thing. Perhaps those experts even ran the regulatory department for decades before they went into private practice. And then on the flip side, the agency has an employee who has a couple years of experience out of undergraduate studies, and the courts are going to give deference to the agency just because it's the agency, not necessarily because that's substantively the right decision. And so that's hard for clients to really understand. But I will circle all the way back for this is something that can be governed by the Administrative Procedures Act.
Representative Schuette, how impactful can a new governor be? We pick a new governor every 4 years. How quickly can a new administration sway what's going and down within an agency?
It can be completely transformative. I mean, a new governor will be the new chief executive of the department and sets the culture and the tone of how they want to do everything from permitting to how they're promulgating rules to how many days employees are in the week during the week to actually process this stuff, right? So new governor will be transformative, and what we want to do in working with whoever is our next governor is make sure it's not like sticking your hand in a bucket of water. You move the water, but then you pull it out, it goes back to the same. We want to enshrine into law and enshrine into statute, and that's we're trying to get done as much that we can get done with the current governor, but then lay out a policy agenda for what does a Michigan that has less red tape and more opportunity look like.
Yeah, what type of policy agenda would you like to see laid out? I know you are leading your caucus is working hard. Are there 1, 2, or 3 points if you'd say, hey, this is what we're really striving for? Success in the next 2 years may look like this.
Yeah, I would say specifically talking about permitting and regulation, it's a one-stop shop for permitting, especially in these key areas like childcare, like housing. that would provide such a huge way to reduce timelines, improve affordability. I would say predictable timeline saying, okay, within 90 days, if you don't issue a permit, you haven't heard back from the state agency, you get your fees refunded, or you get the permit issued, something like that, I think would really be radical to shaking up the administrative culture. And then, I think it goes in and taking a fine-tooth comb through a lot of our occupational licensing and saying, what are we doing that's actually protecting the health and welfare of Michiganders, and what's something like, you have to have a license to be a potato dealer in the state of Michigan. That doesn't make any sense, right? We're not, it takes you more hours to be a hairstylist than to be a commercial airline pilot. That doesn't make any sense, right? So those would be the things I think we can
a lot of antiquated systems.
Exactly.
And so is your work in the committee process, are you going back and reviewing things that you want to change, or is it more focused on we want to put something new in place?
It's a little bit of both, and I think it was our initial tranche of bills was like 55 bills. It takes a lot of white paper to cut red tape, but I think too often, and you mentioned this in earlier, Jim, is that we as the legislature pass hundreds and hundreds of new bills every year, but we don't take a look at what have we done, and is what we're doing actually working. And that's something that they have to do in the private sector, and it's something the Rules Committee and what we've been doing is looking is, all right, what are some of the regulations that they put in the 70s and 80s and 90s and in the aughts that we need to take a look at and say, is this working? And if you look at population and job growth, it's not. So let's take a look at that for sure.
Mike Alaimo, from our perspective at the Michigan Chamber of Commerce and representing businesses across the state, how important is predictability and consistency in trying to improve our economic competitiveness? We view all these issues through, are we going to be better off? What do you hear from members, and how important, I don't want to cut into Mike Patwell's client list, but if we kind of get this regulatory system improved and better, but how meaningful could it be to have real reform?
Right. I hope that the work that the chamber is doing, and certainly the work that Representative Schuette is doing, only empowers a Mike Patwell to go out and have more ammunition in the court when things come up. It's huge. I mean, I think for our businesses, it's really the name of the game. We talk a lot about economic incentives, and people have a wide range of ideas as to what that means. What we know is that, and we talked about this earlier, there are states that are absolutely eating our lunch, not necessarily because they are just handing money to these companies to build here. It's because they have a process, a regulatory system in place that just works better. And I think I want to underscore something that Representative Schuette said. We can do, he's got such a great perspective and approach on these different layers of how we can be impactful in reform. But we can also do all those things while being protective. I have young kids that are in the child care system. I want those protections in place, right? There are important regulations in place that are, protective of, the citizens' needs. We can do those things and, be impactful in changing things in a way that work better for the business community in Michigan.
Yeah, listening to all three of you, it's easy to be optimistic with people like you three working on the issue. Like you're saying, Mike, we need regulation. I don't know anybody who says, I want, low standard building codes and poor air and poor water and put our children at risk. Yes. There are important regulations, make sure you have standards, but doing it in a way there's consistency and fairness and predictability. And I think, Representative Schuette's doing the good work of trying to make sure that happens. But I want to run through the three of you one more time, just to give you one last word of what to say. Mike Alaimo, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So, I think we're going to continue to beat this drum and hopefully, really continue to work with Representative Schuette and maybe help educate other, lawmakers about the importance of this. I think there's a really, broad array of good ideas coming out of his committee, and so we want to see a number of these get across the finish line. It's an interesting year for getting policy items done, and so I think for us it's just how can we do everything that we can to be a voice for change in this space going into the next few months.
Great, Mike Patwell. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Just one perspective and just mine. So just singular in that respect, but a lot of the really good experiences that my clients have had in permitting have been at the county level, actually. And so drain commissioners, some of our best experiences doing projects have been working with the drain commissioners. Similarly, a lot of the soil erosion type permitting that's done through the counties, it works really well.
Yeah, it's kind of nice if we can learn, because obviously we're just scratching the surface today, and we'll come back to this topic in a future podcast, but the interplay between federal, state, local regulatory agencies, what can we learn, how can we streamline? It seems to be a cooperative effort, would be better for everyone. But Representative Schuette, wanted to, final thoughts from you. What are we missing? Anything you want to bring to our attention, to listeners' attention? Thank you again for the work you're doing on it. You're making a difference, and you're improving our economy because what you're doing in the halls of the Capitol.
Well, thank you, and I would just end with that. Michigan has tremendous potential. I mean, this is the state that put the world on wheels, right? We have tremendous entrepreneurial spirit. We have amazing job creators across the state of Michigan. We just need to get out of their way and unleash that opportunity. It's going to make life more affordable, and it's going to create a lot more opportunities here in the state of Michigan.
Well, gentlemen, thank you all for the conversation. Mike Alaimo, Mike Patwell, Representative Bill Schuette. Permitting may not always grab the headlines, but I think we're finding out through today's conversation it's critically important in Michigan. Do projects move forward? What opportunities and jobs are created? And how do we make sure Michigan's moving forward? So thank you all for the conversation. Thanks to all of you for listening. Until next time, for more information on permitting or any policy issue facing the state of Michigan, go to michamber.com.